Hey guys, it's Eric, owner of Farpoint Farms, and tonight we'll be doing something really nasty, really dirty. We're going to replace a CV joint boot, constant velocity joint boot, or an outer CV boot in this case. The inner CV boot is very similar, but we'll be doing an outer CV boot this evening. And this job is not that difficult, but it is nasty. It's dirty. CV joint grease, when it's old, is just dirty and collects all kinds of crud. And new CV joint grease is like the stickiest stuff on earth. So be prepared to have plenty of rubber gloves, plenty of rags, some brake cleaner, carb cleaner, or ideally a parts washer would be great. But we're doing this here at the house, so I'm going to show you how to do this in your garage or even in your yard. Now, I have my CV joint off the car. The whole half shaft is off the car. But in a pinch, you can do this in vehicle. It's just a little more difficult. So the process is going to be the same either way. It's just a little tighter fit if you're trying to do this underneath a wheel well with some of the hammer blows and stuff like that. You'll need a few items, and here's a picture of them right here. You're obviously going to need a hammer. Now, a brass hammer would be ideal, but about 6 months ago mine took a walk and it hasn't come back. So we're just going with a regular hammer. Again, you're going to need plenty of rags, carb cleaners, some gloves. Also probably going to need a screwdriver, and some models will require a pair of not vice grips, but needle nose pliers, and others, like the one I have here, have a snap ring which will require snap ring pliers. So that's what I'm going to need for this. Another thing you might want to invest in would be a side cutter, and you'll need something to tighten the metal straps back down when you're done. I'm going to use side cutters for that as well, but they do make special tools if you happen to have the need or want to have one of those. But this is kind of an explanation for your average Joe doing it at his house, so you may not have the kind of tools necessary to do it right. I'm going to show you that you can do it even if it's not quite right, almost right. All right, so let's move over to the vise, and I'll show you why I'm replacing it, and we'll get started, okay? Okay, so here we go. I've got this thing situated in a vise. As you can see, the CV joint itself doesn't have any play and it's still in good shape, but the boot's trash. You can see it's cut here and here, and that's normal. You get enough mileage on these things, the rubber does eventually fail on them. Although the newer the car gets, the more technologically advanced this rubber has become. So you don't see these failures as often as you did, say, in the 80s. This being a CV joint from the 80s doesn't surprise me a bit. Now, to start with, we're going to remove all this rubber, but in order to do that and make it a little easier to cut, you have two bands here, and that's what holds the joint boot in place. So we're going to want to get rid of those. Depending on your model, if you have a side cutter, this would be a great time to use it and just cut that. I'm going to try to just pop it with a screwdriver and a hammer, and we'll see how that goes. That's one. That's two. So those are there. We'll toss those. You won't be reusing that. Now we just want to cut this boot off if it's not already completely missing. And hopefully it's not, because if it's completely missing, chances are the axle joint itself is probably got some pretty serious contamination in it, and it may not be that great an idea to go ahead and rebuild it. But in a pinch, you certainly can. And go ahead and finish cutting this rubber. There we go. I'll go ahead and toss this in the trash. Try to keep the crap down to a minimum. The crud down to a minimum. Okay, now we're just going to clean off as much of this nasty grease as we can. There's plenty more hiding inside. We'll get that out of the way. Again, if you have a parts washer, take this thing over to the parts washer right now and let it soak for a few minutes. Clean all of that out of there. That'd be ideal. Okay, so I've gone ahead, taken it outside. I've used about half that can of carburetor cleaner or brake cleaner that I had, and I've cleaned this up enough that I can see my little snap ring. Now, here's a picture of what it looks like. It's going to be very difficult to see this while I'm filming it, but you're going to want to get your snap ring pliers down in there and spread those snap rings apart. Okay, and while they're apart, take your hammer, and again, a brass one would be much better, and take a little whack. Now, now let's see if even with this flashlight, now I don't know if you can tell, but try to wipe it down. It's past that ring. So the snap ring is now fully opened up and I'm off it. So another few little minor taps and it's completely off. That's it. It's not so bad, right? So now I'm going to take this outside. I'm going to clean the rest of the grease off of it. And I'll go ahead and clean this up as well. We'll slide our new boot on and we'll be ready to put this thing back together. You see an axle from AutoZone or whatnot, it's going to run you maybe $160 rebuilt. And if you're just talking about a torn boot, if you have a half hour or 45 minutes to spare, you can do a whole lot better time-wise than that. Because this boot kit cost me $11. That's it. You got that cleaned. It doesn't have to be 100% clean. If you got a parts washer, you can easily get it 100% clean. But I don't, I'm 3/4 of the way through my brake clean. And I want to have a little left over for cleanup. So that's good enough. As long as there's no major chunks of sand and stuff in there, you'll be a-okay. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm just going to wipe down the shaft here, make sure that these splines are fairly clean. Okay, like so. Now we'll go into our boot kit here. Some of these kits are going to come with more pieces than others. Let's take a look at what we got here. Sometimes they'll come with replacement snap rings. Some kits come with that, others don't. This one is a fairly basic kit, but again, it was only $11, so that's pretty nice. We've got our replacement CV grease, and gosh, that stuff is messy. So we'll wait to open that up for a second. And then we've got these two clips here, which are our inner and outer bands for tightening this back up. So this actually is quite tricky if you don't have the proper tool, but it can be done. I'm going to show you how that works. Go ahead and get those opened up here. My guess is, since this is for a Yugo, these parts have probably been sitting on the shelf for many, many, many years. And surprisingly, they still had axles available for this. For I think it was $11.50 plus $1 or $2 shipping. We'll say it takes 2 pairs of gloves to get this job done. That's not nowhere near as cheap as I could have got an axle for. So let's go back over to the axle now. I'll slide the boot on, and we're not going to tighten anything up yet. We're going to slide the boot on. Then we're going to pack a ton of grease into and kind of push down on there, clean off our hands, and we'll hammer this back on. Again, the snap ring is still in there. You can see that there. So this one doesn't even get replaced, so we're going to reuse that. But you want to just hammer it down until it fits back into that groove, and you'll see the tabs go from being wide open down to closed again, and that's it. That'll be the end of that part of it. Then it'll just be a matter of tightening the boot back on. We're ready to reinstall. Okay, and this is important. I want to obviously slide this thing on. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a rush, and I failed to put that boot on before I reassembled it, only to have to take it back apart again. And it's going to be a whole lot messier once the grease is in there. So a lot of cars, this shaft is the same size all the way up, so you can slide this thing way back. Unfortunately, this is not the case, so we'll just have to slide it in there and then we'll get it back into place. Now we're back with our axle CV joint itself, and we're going to cut open just a corner of this. So I'm just going to take the corner here off like that, so I can squeeze this now and just kind of squeeze it into the joint. And again, this is where it gets messy, so make sure you got plenty of rags. Matter of fact, I'm going to go grab one more rag. Here we go. I'm going to jam it right in the center hole. Squeeze. As you can see, it's coming out the sides. That's what you want. You want it to make sure that it's going all the way through. And pack that in there. We'll put any extra. And all this will end up inside the boot when it's done. And there we go. Our package is empty, and good Lord, we got ourselves a genuine 100% mess. But that's alright, because we're about to hammer this thing back on. Now, when you go to tap this thing back into place, I'd recommend using the nut and putting it back on the bottom here so you don't damage the threads while you're beating on this thing. So we'll do that, tighten it a few turns. Take our hammer, want to line that back up. Don't want to force it, but as you can see, it's already gone back up in there. And now, and this is the hard part, I can't show this on film, but I'm going to stick my finger in there and reach around and make sure that the snap ring has collapsed back down. That will indicate that I'm back on the ring. Because short of cleaning all this grease off, there's really not many ways to tell if that's been a success story or not. So let me go ahead and pause the camera and I'll check that. So we're ready to slide our boot back into place, like so. And some grease is going to come out around this. Like I said, this is a nasty job. We've got it back in place. Get as much of that out of the way as possible. And we're ready to put our clips back in. I'm going to start with the back one here since it's a little easier to get at. Okay, so like everything, there's a special tool involved here, but we don't have that tool, so we'll go ahead and do it without. But you're going to want to take your band here and slide it through this slot, and then pull it down as tight as you can. You can use a pair of needle nose, kind of get that extra little oomph out of it. Okay, and once you've got it tight, you have this clamp here. You want to flip that clamp over. Again, I'm going to use my needle nose to get a little extra oomph. Secure that clamp down like so, and then you've got these two bands here that are going to hold that in place. There's one, and there's the other one. I'll take a hammer here and just tap down on those to make sure that they're not going anywhere. There we go. As you can see, that clamp is tight. That ain't going anywhere. So I'm going to rotate this, and we'll trim off that excess. We don't want that getting in the way of anything. And then we'll hammer that flat so it doesn't cause damage to the boot. Shoot. Like so. Okay, and then we'll do the other side. Alright, well thankfully I had another band clamp laying around because the one that I initially did, well, it broke. It was a little thinner than that one, but it does fit and it's nice and tight in there. The inside one's also in there. Hopefully you can see that with the camera going. And my joint, well, it's nice and lubed and it's nice and free. My threads are still good. My axle is now ready to go back into the car. So that's it. It's messy, and I did break both my gloves, but that's okay. One sacrificial set of gloves, one can of brake clean, and one $11.50 boot kit later. We'll call it $13 or $14, right? Not a bad deal considering at the cheapest you're going to find online for a rebuilt CV axles, look, 60 bucks. And that's for very common cars. For something a little less common, something a little older, 140, 150, that's about the norm you're going to pay. So for a little bit of time and effort to replace the boots, you know, as long as you haven't been driving around with no boot on your car for ages, this is going to fix it. This is going to take care of any clicking or knocking sounds. If your state has inspections that will fail for boots, this will obviously get you through your inspection. And again, this can be done on the car so you can save a lot of time not having to pull the axle out of your car if you don't have the tools to do that, depending on the model and make. It can be done on the car. Some cars have a snap ring like the one we have here where you need your snap ring pliers. Other ones just have a spread ring, it's still a snap ring, but it doesn't require a tool at all. It's just a couple of good whacks and it pops off of that ring, comes out, and usually those come with a new ring when you go to reinstall them. I'm Eric, owner of Farpoint Farms. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you learned something today and save a few bucks down the road when the time comes to replace your CV boot. And I'll see you next time. Take care.